Hey everybody, what's happening? My name's Steven.
And I'm Spencer.
We've partnered with Stanford University to bring you the Cannabis Awareness and Prevention Toolkit, Finding Your Dopamine, the Developing Brain. Today we'll be watching some videos about the developing brain and look at why it's important to figure out who you are at this time and what your interests are. There will be some opportunities where we'll ask you some questions and you'll just answer those at home. What we're going to do first is we're going to watch a quick video regarding the basics of dopamine.
Here's the end of one brain cell. And here's the beginning of the next. And here's basically the way the brain works. We get input into the brain all the time. Here, almost everybody's listening to this guy talk about the brain, okay? But there's something that's happening in everybody's brain. When it comes into a brain cell, it says, okay, with that input, I think I'm going to cook up this particular neurotransmitter. And it cooks it up, and it loads it up on this brain cell. Then the second thing that happens is an electric spark. We basically work with fluids, tubes, and electricity. Okay, the electric spark in the brain is called a synapse. And when a synapse happens, what it does is it fires across this space whatever neurotransmitter it chose to make. And when this puppy hits the receptor site on the next brain cell, we experience something. We either think something or we feel something. And it goes on to the next and the next, and it all happens real quick. Okay. Inside the brain, in this nucleus accumbens, it happens to make a particular neurotransmitter called dopamine. And when dopamine hits the receptor site, some really important things happen. The first moments you slip out of your biological mother's womb, you just come onto the planet here. They cut the umbilical cord, they tie it up, they sponge off the mucus in the blood, and then hopefully somebody comes along, picks this baby up, brings that baby to their chest, and gives that baby some milk. When that milk touches that baby's lips and inputs into that baby's brain, for whatever reason, through God or nature that's built in there, deep down inside in this nucleus accumbens, it causes it to fire off this drug, dopamine. When dopamine hits the receptor site inside that baby's brain, the baby goes, milk. Yeah, milk. I am interested in this. This has got, yeah. Dopamine hits a receptor site, you go, yeah, okay. Now, what we used to think that this was about was we used to think that dopamine was about pleasure. Somebody touches your skin real nice, you eat some chocolate ice cream, it fires off some dopamine in your brain, and you go, yeah, I like that. It turns out that this dopamine thing goes much deeper than that, much deeper. See, because if the baby doesn't get milk, the baby dies. You with me here? So what this dopamine thing is saying to this baby is, baby, milk important. Milk important. What dopamine really is it's the what's important filter.
So what Ralph tells us in this video is that your main job is finding out who you are by determining what fires off dopamine for you. It's important at this stage of brain development to find out what stimulates it naturally, which is different for everyone.
Ralph covers the example of a baby using dopamine to assign milk as not only pleasurable but also extremely important. This might bring up some concerns that a young person might have when it comes to marijuana and cannabis. See, the developing brain could falsely label marijuana or cannabis use as something important or even essential to your survival. So what do you think he means when he says he is worried about some young people's brains telling them that marijuana use is important? Are there other things sometimes people could get addicted to because their brain is telling them that it's important? For example, it could be your cell phones, checking your cell phone, checking your social media, or even your video games. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to watch a video that discusses the importance of finding your natural source of dopamine.
We used to think that dopamine was about pleasure. Somebody touches your skin real nice, you eat some chocolate ice cream, it fires off some dopamine in your brain, and you go, yeah, I like that. It turns out that this dopamine thing goes much deeper than that, much deeper. Important. What dopamine really is it's the what's important filter. Beginning. It's the same for everybody. Getting food, being connected to other people, all that stuff. But once you start to individuate. Once you start to say, well, who am I on this? Now, what fires off dopamine for one person doesn't necessarily do it for another. As you begin to individuate, this guy here that's firing off this dopamine for you, this is what's telling you what you're interested in. Well, some people are interested in science more. Some people are more art people. Some people are more sports people. I don't know. Some people are more literature. I don't know what that is. But that's kind of like your job at this point, is to figure out where your interests are. Where is your juice? So when I come here and I do this teaching, it fires off dopamine for me. And they pay me for it. Okay? It's called getting a life. All right? That's what you're looking for during this 12 to 18 time, is to figure out what makes you feel alive. Where is your juice? Where is your interest? Where is this dopamine thing for you? Okay? Here's where drugs come into it. Instead of this happening, somebody comes along. Let's see if this green works good here. And oh, this is better. And says, here, smoke a little of this. Tetrahydrocannabinol, the active ingredient in marijuana. Or here, drink a little of this. Alcohol. And I'll stop there for the time being. Now, here's where things get very interesting, because if you look around the room, everybody's face is different. Everybody's face is different, okay? And not only is everybody's face different, everybody's brain is different. You get your brain, your face, all this stuff from your biological mother and father, and they get it from their biological mother and father all the way back, okay? So when we come here into this room, everybody has a different face, and everybody has a different brain. So, you bring alcohol and weed in here. Some people are sitting with a brain where they go, what are you, crazy? Why would I want to do that to my brain? And they don't drink or smoke, and they're not interested in it, okay? Some people get born with a brain where they're curious, and they smoke weed, and they get paranoid. They don't smoke weed after that. Or they drink alcohol, and they get real sick and throw up and have a hangover the next day, and they don't drink anymore, okay? Some people get born with a brain where they smoke weed, and their brain does this. Huh, this person says, hey, that's not bad. I kind of like that. Maybe I'll do it again sometime, okay? And we got all these gradations of brains, and there's some people that are sitting in here with a brain that when they smoke weed, it does this. What we used to say in the Bronx, bada bing. It fires off a whole bunch of dopamine. Now, this is a very interesting experience here. Picture a 9th grade girl smokes some weed, and she's got the kind of brain where it fires off a whole bunch of dopamine, okay? I don't care what her parents say. I don't care what her friends say. I don't care what anybody says. What this girl's brain says is, ooh, this good. This very good. This important. This like mother's milk, okay? That's the message that she's getting in the brain. And then after that, then you can give a whole diet. Oh, not only that, but it just got legalized. And it's a medicine, and it's an herb, and on and on and on. Okay, so I want to say a couple of things about this experience. To have a bunch of dopamine fire off in your brain, in my opinion, is a good thing. I hope everybody gets a chance stepping onto a lacrosse court, going, yeah, right? Or reading a piece of literature, or maybe learning about this stuff here. You want to figure out what in here fires off dopamine for me. That's your job at this point.
So in the video, Ralph talks about your juice. And that's another way of asking you, what is your passion, or what is your drive, or what's important to you? So, question for you guys is, what are some examples of some things you're passionate about? So some examples could include playing sports, music, maybe making your own or listening to it, dancing, fashion, reading, playing video games, or just spending time with your friends or family.
Ralph lists a few examples of what can release dopamine, such as playing lacrosse or even reading a good book. What are some examples of activities that release dopamine for you? Some possibilities could include playing sports, lifting weights, hiking, mountain climbing, mountain biking, or even dirt bike riding.
So why do you think experiencing pleasure is important? Pleasure helps us to assign what's important for survival, such as food, water, sleep, and relationships, both romantic and your friendships and with your family. So next we're going to watch a short video that discusses how marijuana can cheat the brain.
Do want to figure out what in here fires off dopamine for me. That's your job at this point. However, if you short-circuit it with the weed, this is a whole other ballgame here. Here's what I want to say about the weed. I'm not saying that marijuana is good or bad. We got to get off with the good or the bad. It is quite a complex drug. But there's one thing that's very important to understand. And sometimes I even wonder why I have to teach this, but I do. This is a trick. This is not the real thing. This is a trick that happens to have the magic in it that for some brains can fire off a whole bunch of dopamine so their brains say, yeah. But it's not the real thing. And what can happen is people look at this like this girl and go, wow, this is important. It's a trick, folks. It's not the real thing. And I want to say something about this trick. But to trick the brain at this point, like for instance, you get to a party. How do you party? Somebody says, you don't need to figure out how to party. Just drink a little of this, smoke a little of this. You may be sitting in the same chair, but you're partying, okay? You get together with friends after school at 15 years old. What do? That's a really important thing to figure out. What's going to fire off some dopamine for us on this? Well, in our area here in Northern California, the odds are, if you're with a group of kids and they're trying to figure out what to do, one of the kids says, we don't have to figure it out. Let's just roll ourselves a fat one. That way, all we got to do is get loaded, and then we don't need to figure out what to do. It's a done deal. You feel a little down. You smoke a little weed, you're not down anymore. You're bored. Smoke a little weed, you're not bored anymore. But I want to say something. To do that at this point and to trick the brain, what you're tricking is trying to figure out what fires off dopamine for you. How do you recreate? What do you do when you hang out with friends? How do you party? Where are your interests? Where is that juice? That's your job at this point, is to figure that out. To short circuit it with the weed. First of all, it becomes a dead-end street. I'll tell you why it becomes a dead-end street. So what the brain has to do is it says, I got to make more dopamine receptor sites so I can handle all the dopamine. So you start to create what I call a party brain. That says, okay, we're ready now. Where's the dopamine? Because we got our receptor sites there. The second thing that happens is as you pound these receptor sites with dopamine, it's kind of like taking a set of headphones, putting it on, and turning up the volume real loud. After a while, your ears go a little deaf. Here, after a while, you don't feel it as much. So now, I'm going to need more of this to make this happen, okay? And you're developing a brain that says you want more and you feel it less, okay? And I want to say something about this. Maybe at some point, this thinking part of your brain that's been getting this guy high all this time, this thinking part says, listen, we got to stop now. We're going to get UA, we got a job, we got whatever. This part of the brain says, no, I don't want to stop. No, we have to stop now. No. We got to stop. No. And you get a war inside your brain. And if this guy wins, and you keep doing it even though you're saying no, now you're in big trouble. Now we're getting into what addiction is. Maybe you got to go to rehab. What do you rehab to if you never did figure these things out in the first place? If you never did figure out, how do I lift my spirits? How do I recreate? How do I hang out with? It's like starting from the beginning.
Once you start to individuate or try to figure out who am I, the firing off of dopamine differs for everyone because of our interests and our brains are being different as well. What do you think he means by short-circuiting? Some young people may have brains which may fire off a lot of dopamine when they use marijuana or cannabis. By using marijuana or cannabis, you're not allowing your brain to assign what is important or what brings you natural pleasure. It actually stunts your potential. It is your job at this point in your life to figure out what brings you pleasure naturally.
So marijuana and cannabis tricks the brain into thinking it's the most important activity. So here you see this question. So what do we mean by recreation or recreate? Using marijuana and cannabis in these situations doesn't allow the brain to think about what to do next. If someone is bored, instead of using marijuana or cannabis, what other activities might they consider? Some examples can be going for a run, drawing, dancing, singing, or really whatever interests that particular individual.
Someone using marijuana or cannabis may not feel the same amount of artificial pleasure like they used to, so they may use more thinking that it will restore that same pleasure. But when more marijuana or cannabis is used, the brain becomes less sensitive or becomes numb because it's being pounded by dopamine. Over time, someone's brain won't feel as much pleasure as before, and someone might use more thinking that the same pleasure that was lost will return. The reality is that the brain has its limits and will produce less pleasure response to more marijuana cannabis use.
So what are some examples of when this may have happened to you or one of your friends? Have you ever known that it was best for you to study for a test, but instead you blew it off? Or did you ever eat something you knew wasn't good for you and later you regretted it? We've all kind of been there, and sometimes we overrule that thinking part of the brain just based off pleasure. Another example might be getting in a car with somebody who was high on marijuana or cannabis. What would your brain be telling you? So it could be telling you that it's dangerous, or another part could be dismissing that danger. So your prefrontal cortex, or your thinking part of the brain, is telling you, hey, you really should do this. But there are other parts of your brain, the nucleus accumbens, seeking pleasure that tell you otherwise.
One of Ralph's concerns describing someone rehabilitating from marijuana and cannabis use is that they have never fully discovered or created other ways of releasing dopamine and feeling good. As adults, they now have to figure out what brings them natural pleasure, which is harder to do because the brain can't learn quite like it used to. It is finished development, it is not as elastic or as flexible. Right now we're going to watch another short video that discusses the pruning and myelination.
So, now I'm talking about the stage between 12 and 18. So here's what I'm saying your brain looks like at 12. I know it's a goofy picture, but I love it. And what it's supposed to be is an aerial view in LA of a bunch of roads running in a bunch of different directions. Well, what I'm saying your brain transforms into between 12 and 18, and it doesn't solidify till you're 25. But when you're walking out of high school at 18 years old, it looks like this. And there's two enormous changes that have taken place during this stage of development when you begin to individuate and you begin to find out who you are. First thing is there's less highways. It's called pruning. If you've ever seen a gardener prune a tree, they cut out big branches of the tree so the tree really gets a chance to take its shape and to grow and to go where it needs to go. Okay? Here, the roads that you don't take, the roads that aren't firing off dopamine for you at all, you've got no interest in those roads between 12 and 18, they get pruned away. It's exactly what's supposed to happen. You're getting rid of a lot of the stuff that you're not interested in. And that leaves room for the stuff that you are interested in. And the stuff that you are interested in, those get to be major highways. And I want to explain what that is. So, let's say this is my brain. And what interested me in growing up was basketball. And I'd be out in front of my house and practicing jump shots, okay, in the schoolyard. And for a jump shot, you use your ankles, you use your calves, you use your quads, and you jump, okay? And when you get good at jumping, you recognize that there's a certain spot in the jump where you don't go up any higher, but you haven't started to come down yet. There's a split-second pause. At that split-second pause, you use your forearm, your wrist, your fingertips, and that's where you take your shot, okay? I went through a whole bunch of connections that were my jump shot connections. And now when I go, I do it again. And I do it again. And I do it again. And I keep getting on this road. What begins to grow around the outside of these electrical connections is something called myelin. And what myelin is like insulation on a wire. The more you do it, the more it insulates that wire, the better that puppy fires off. So after a while, that gets hardwired in. So, during this time, between 12 and 18, the stuff that you work gets hardwired in, and the stuff that you don't work gets pruned away. It's a very crucial time. And if you begin to use the weed thing here, you got to figure out where to buy it. Then when you figure out where to buy it, you got to get money to buy it. And then when you get money to buy it, and you buy it, then you look at it and you go, well, how do you do this? Do you grind it up, or do you put it in a pipe? You got to get the accoutrements for it. Then after you get the accoutrements for it, then you got to figure out where you're going to do it. And then you do it. Fires off a bunch of dopamine. Your brain says, thank you very much. Next time, it's a little bit easier. Next time is a little bit easier. I was speaking to a kid who said, listen, Ralph, I only smoke weed on the weekends. You know how much that kid smokes over a year's time? 100 times. That's what I want at this point, those roads that get myelinated in to lead to what really fires off dopamine for you. I don't want it to lead to weed at this point. You're not going to die of an overdose. It's not going to kill you. But the thing is, it takes you off your direction. You have a job to do right now. And the job is to figure out who you are. And who you are is what you're interested in. And to short circuit that with the weed at this point, not only takes you off your task, but it hardwires in this other piece. That between the ages of 12 and 18, really if you can make it longer, that's great. But this is a time when weed is really detrimental.
Ralph is describing how the brain wires in or strengthens connections to the brain that are responsible for performing certain skills and activities. Myelination helps you perform these activities or skills more efficiently and makes it easier for the brain to remember how to do it. Ralph uses the example of making a jump shot when playing basketball. But in the case of the marijuana cannabis use, Ralph is worried that young people are training their brain to get pleasure from weed, and then they're myelinating that and training your brain to also think that it's important. Why do you think that may be a problem for some of you young people?
So what are some things that bring you pleasure that you think you have started to myelinate? Another question you guys can kind of answer for yourselves at home right now. Again, some examples could be cooking, playing sports, playing a musical instrument, making music or making art, dating, shopping for clothes, spending time with your close friends, maybe volunteering or helping out with your community as well.
What Ralph's concern with young people myelinating marijuana use? His concern is that you will have cheated your brain from improving or perfecting a cool new skill that fires off dopamine naturally for you. Your brain cannot learn every new skill that you encounter, so that you have to be highly selective because over time you will keep the ones that fire off the most dopamine for you. Those connections in the brain firing the high amount of dopamine will become myelinated.
So weekend-only users would be using about 100 times per year. That's quite a bit, guys. It can take off your direction and distract you from finding out what naturally fires off dopamine for you. This is important because your job as a young person is to determine who you are by looking at what naturally brings you pleasure.
So that is going to wrap up video number 2. We have one more video that we will be bringing you. If you've got any questions or anything like that, please don't hesitate to give Spencer or myself a call. Our telephone number is 209-257-1980. You can listen for one of our extensions and just give us a call. You can also check us out on Facebook. You can also check us out on YouTube. Go to youtube.com and search for Nexus Youth and Family Services and click some of the videos there. And if you've got any questions for us, please don't hesitate to give us a call.
And as always, guys, stay healthy and stay safe.